Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Guilty as Charged podcast, coming to you live on a Thursday evening. I believe we are officially 3 weeks out from the start of training camp, so the countdown is officially on. Super excited to get to that point of the calendar. Training camp, one of my favorite times of the year, and excited to dive into our show tonight, where we'll be ranking our weakest and strongest Chargers position groups. Certainly a question that I think is more difficult than you might think on a first glance at the depth chart, given the Chargers' big names. But, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Joining me to do that tonight, as always, is my guy, Tyler. Tyler, what's up, man? How you doing tonight?
Doing very well. Officially not on call anymore for jury duty. So that's like a huge, that was great. That was great to figure out right before the stream.
Nice.
Yeah, this question, this whole weakest versus strongest Chargers position groups was tougher to figure out than I would have guessed, because if you just say starters versus starters, then maybe it's a bit easier. But thinking of the depth chart, the injuries, the lack of depth, it gets a bit more complicated. But unlike Ryan Poles, I didn't put 60 hours into my week trying to figure it out.
I couldn't believe that, man. And then, if you missed the story, I think it was ESPN did a story on Ryan Poles. It was a great story. Really cool insight into his kind of mentality and stuff like that. But 60 hours a week, he bought a mattress and took it to his office and was sleeping at his mattress because he was working so often. I understand the grind, and I understand you got to work hard when you got to work hard. But man, some professionals in sports really need some boundaries. I don't know if you saw the Shams Charania thing. I don't know if you know who he is, but he covers he's like the NBA's version of Ian Rappaport.
Oh, yeah.
He posted a screen time, or his average screen time for the week of NBA free agency was like 19 and a half hours per day. So I'm like, dude, when are you sleeping? Are you sleeping like 3 hours a day? So, this is my way of saying professional athletes and reporters, set some boundaries for yourself and actually get some good night's sleep for once.
How much do you think how long do you think you watch film for when the draft is around? So include your entire work week plus film for the content we do. How long do you think we work, or you?
During the season, I would say I'm probably doing like 70 hours a week.
Yeah, that's more than I do.
But I'm a full-time school counselor, so I'm working, I'm working 9 hours a day at the school.
Mm-hmm.
And then what is that? What's 9 times 5? 45. So I'm doing like 45-hour work weeks, and then I'm probably watching film for like 20 hours a week, maybe. During draft season, it's probably about the same.
Wow, impressive. I don't want to calculate the hours with the past year. It's going to dramatically decrease, but yeah, rough.
Yeah,
rough.
Well, I mean, you've had to work, I mean, you're doing your student teaching, you're doing your school stuff, you're doing stuff for the podcast. So, if you take into consideration like everything we do in terms of like booking guests and editing the show and tweeting out the show and like, doing research for the show, I'm saying I probably am doing like 70 hours a week during the season.
Yeah. All that to be called a douchebag on Twitter.
It is what it is. You can't make everybody happy.
Yeah. That's why I have 2 X's.
Yeah. And more happy news, we're officially a week away from the rehearsal dinner for Tyler's wedding. So,
are you going to be there?
No, unfortunately not.
Okay.
I have regional counselor meetings that day, speaking of counselor stuff, but yeah.
47 hours next week then for you.
Yeah. Yeah, fair. Yeah, so fun stuff. Obviously, we're going to have our usual show for the Chargers is going to be hopefully including a special interview with a real bucket list guest of ours. So I don't want to spoil the name just yet, but make sure you guys stay tuned for that one next week. All right, Tyler, before we get started, we've got to give a quick shout out to our friends over at Caldera Lab. Again, promoting men's skincare. Something I definitely am taking more interest in my own life as I get older. I turn 30 this year, which is crazy. So yeah, I have to give a quick shout out to Caldera Labs, stepping up my skincare game. And you guys can do that as well if you go to calderalab.com and use the code guilty at checkout for 20% off your first order. So it's a great deal. Men's skincare, really any skincare, obviously, is pretty expensive these days, but use that 20% discount code makes all the difference in the world. They have eye serum, they have daily moisturizer, and definitely worth checking out. So again, that's calderalab.com/guilty with the code guilty at checkout for 20% off your first order.
Yep, highly recommend it. Link in the description as well.
Yes, thank you for that. And yes, as Soloman points out, we are on Threads. At least I am, and the podcast account is. So if you are frustrated with Twitter and looking for a new outlet, you can follow us over there on Threads at GEC Podcast 17, at S Haglund 01 for myself as well. So Tyler, are you on Threads?
No.
Okay. So it's interesting. That you're just kind of like thrown into the feed. You're not able to see stuff that your friends are posting just yet. So it's like the very basic version of their Twitter counterpart. But I'm curious to see how this one goes. Should be fun. It's going to be annoying building up replacing a 16,000 follower podcast page from Twitter if it comes to that. But hopefully you guys can go check us out over there.
I don't know. I'm gonna play the music on the Titanic as it goes down. My God to thee, or goodness to thee, or whatever the song was. Yeah. Go down with the ship.
No, I'm still very active on Twitter. Podcast account still very active on Twitter, but I throw Threads a bone. We'll see what happens. All right, let's dive into the meat of our conversation here, which is obviously the ranking of the Chargers' best and weakest position groups. Again, like I said earlier, definitely a more difficult conversation when you really dive into things and ranking, how these groups stand up. Of course, there's some injury concerns, question marks. Of course, there's some rookie question marks, second-year player question marks, and just kind of lack of depth at certain positions. So I think we all feel great about the Chargers' star players when healthy, obviously, but when you really dive into stacking up these position groups, curious to see how it ultimately ends up. So, Tyler, what was kind of your process? How did you start out with picking where to look, who to sort out in what order?
I did a sort of version of our tier list where I'm like, okay, who are like the bona fide stars? And in some categories, those guys really do carry for their group. And then I went from there for like solid starter, rotational piece, rookie, roster bubble, unrosterable, or not going to make the roster sort of players. I kind of just went through, and I didn't really assign like a number or a value to them, but I just wanted to kind of see if I open up a spreadsheet, how they would fall into different categories, and just see like, okay, who's got the stronger depth. And sometimes when you're looking at it, maybe like the starter for one position, the starter for another position are generally about the same. But if you get to, the next category and the category after that, the person in the solid starter category for one position is significantly better, or even the other categories or the other position doesn't even have someone in that category. So I just kind of went through it and did a spreadsheet to sort of evaluate where guys were at, and just kind of tried to weigh, what is an elite player at this position, solid starter, et cetera, just to kind of see where everybody fell. And that's kind of how I broke it up.
Yeah, I think when it comes down to doing this kind of exercise, I think for me, I was looking at like, okay, 1 through 4 on each position group. How does that maybe kind of stack up? I think that's maybe the best way to stack up these positions that have that many players. Obviously, you can't do that with quarterback. You could do that with running back, I guess. So it's just an interesting exercise because corners, for example, I think you probably go 1 through 6. Defensive linemen, maybe you go 1 through 6. Edge rushers probably only goes 1 through 4. Receivers 1 through 6, depending on how you feel about Jalen Guyton. So, for me, the biggest question mark is really how do you measure injuries? How do you measure, these young players who we might feel good about, but we don't really know. Like, I think we feel good. Like the two of us, I think we feel better about Jasir Taylor than the consensus is, but we don't really know what he's going to look like if he is, given a chance to be a starting cornerback. Like, we don't really know what Tuli Pelotu looks like as edge 3. I think we feel really good about him now, his potential, but what does that actually look like? There's just some uncertainty there. So those were the two biggest factors, I think, for me. Like you mentioned, just like kind of lack of depth at certain spots, and then injuries and like player development. How do I weigh somebody who I'm confident in can take a step forward or make an instant impact versus, okay, what's the downside here? What's the floor of this player at this certain position?
Yeah, I felt like if we did this last year, to my knowledge, there weren't any injuries or significant ones heading into the season. There was certainly no JC Jackson type, Otito Ogbonnia, Austin Johnson, that sort of thing. So I don't think we had that last season, unless you thought they would sign Ibushi at some point. So it would have been a bit easier last year. I even feel like JC Jackson would have been so much easier to place last year because we would have not known, but we would have known at the time where you put him, which is probably as a superstar, corner, one of the best players on the team. That's so different this year. So I feel like it was just really difficult this year to place some guys based on expectations or stability, consistency. There are some players who had really good seasons last year, but now I'm trying to project, can they do it again? And so that kind of made into this as well.
Yeah, 100%. Some qualifiers, we are separating the offensive line groups. So we're doing tackles and interior offensive line. And then we didn't want to put Xander Horvath in his own position group. So we did include him with the running back. So I guess that one does go 1 through 4. So just some qualifiers there. And then obviously quarterback is a bit interesting because, I mean, ideally Easton Stick doesn't see the field at all. So you don't really have like a primary depth piece that's going to play a lot versus like, Jasir Taylor, Tui Pelotu, Joshua Kelly, Donald Parham. Like, these guys do see the field and do make an impact really on the roster, on the statistics and the win-loss column and all that. So curious to see how quarterback ends up here. But Tyler, what was maybe the biggest debate? Again, don't want you to like spoil your ranking or anything, but what was the biggest debate you had of these position groups?
Biggest debate. That's tough. There's definitely a range, and we can maybe, when I get to it, maybe I'll talk about that. There was a group of 3 positions where I could see them flip-flopping. It was kind of just a debate whether this one player at his position who's really, really good can outweigh maybe better depth at the other position group that are ranked below them. So we'll definitely get to that in a bit. But I would say that the toughest group for me to place was corner, because every single person has a question mark.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. I think we feel good about JC Jackson, but we don't know what he really looks like. Just here, Taylor, and that. Interior defensive line was tough for me because I think if we knew that Otito and Austin Johnson were healthy, I think that group 1 through 6 is the deepest on the team. Like, I would feel comfortable saying that. I think there are other position groups with like higher end talent, but you have solid players, reliable players that you really trust, at least 1 through 5, and then you have Scott Matlock as potentially a promising rookie. But we just don't know what Austin Johnson is going to look like. We don't know what Otito is going to look like. So that is probably the group that ended up, on like initially I was like, oh, like I really like the defensive tackle room. I know where that's at. But then as you stack them up, it's like, okay, there's too many concerns here. So for me, like the defensive line group was the biggest mover down from when I first started this.
Yeah, and it could change if we did this as who's the best position group if everyone's healthy or by the end of the season, because then we've seen some development, we hope for some development, then yeah, they could easily be number 1 because they're working with Jay Rogers. Half of them have already worked with Coach Ed. They'll be we'd assume that they were healthy or hope that they're healthy. But yeah, they are more question marks there. And then I guess there was some debate there, like, okay, what is it going to be like when Morgan Fox has his second year? Is he going to be better? Was that the best he's ever going to get in a sort of contract year? Is Austin Johnson going to come back and be the force that he was? And then from there, like for those guys, none of those guys are stars on the team. Maybe leadership wise, sure, but they're not superstars. There's no like Aaron Donald is a star at D tackle. The guys that the Chargers have are really good. They're just not stars. So how do you weigh that versus guys that have a star at least at their spot?
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. All right, let's get into it. You want to start with the weakest groups or the strongest groups first?
Let's go weakest, and I don't think it'll be any surprise to anybody.
Yeah. We've talked a lot about these position groups. I'm curious to see how your thought process ended up, but the four that I have at the bottom are for the Chargers are linebacker, tight end, safety, and running back.
Yep.
Are those the same four for you too?
Yeah, my order it was linebacker like worst for you.
No, those were just no order there.
Oh, okay. So for me, it was linebacker, tight end, safety, running back. So yeah, we're
That
on the
was
same
your
page there,
yeah.
and it's not a surprise.
How did you? Because I think there's an interesting debate here about like maybe the best player. Like how do you weigh Gerald Everett versus Eric Kendricks, for example?
Yeah.
How do you weigh, Eamon Olagbongbemiga or Deion Henley versus like
hmm
JT Woods, for example? So what were your thoughts there as you kind of went through these four groups?
It really came down to the second option, to be completely honest. Okay, of the four groups, Derwin James is the best player, and then probably Austin Eckler. Actually, yeah, it would be Austin Eckler. So
Clearly, yeah.
safety and running back were ninth and eighth. Safety being eighth, running back being ninth for me. So they just by that alone, as their number one at their position group, they put them there. But it really came down to the second one. So if you're looking at the second category, then it's Alohi Gilman, Joshua Kelly, Donald Parham, and then Kenneth Murray at this point. And so Alohi, I think I feel the best about of that group,
Mm.
even though he probably has the least upside of the group. Like maybe Joshua Kelly has more upside, I guess. I don't know. But Alohi has like worked his way into being a solid enough starter. I don't know what we ended up grouping him as in our tiers, but I believe we had felt like average starter or average starter with upside was where he was at.
Hmm.
And that's maybe where Donald Parham could be. The issue with the tight end group was it's kind of a mess. Gerald Everett, I think, is I don't say neck and neck with Eric Kendricks, but I feel like they both, in terms of their positions, rank about the same. But Donald Parham, it's tough to say that he's better than Kenneth Murray because Kenneth Murray's an actual starter or has been, and Donald Parham has barely played. But I guess in their roles, I feel better about Parham. So it definitely was tough to figure out these four, maybe how they would rank outside of the two best players, Derwin James and Austin Eckler, carrying the weight a little bit more and putting them at quote unquote better spots than tight end and linebacker, where I feel like the depth is just so unknown behind those starters. And even the starters that they have aren't like top five at their positions.
Yeah, I think these four are pretty clearly like objectively the four weakest. I think you feel good about obviously Derwin and Alohi. So for me, like I almost even had this like it's as two different tiers. Like I would have, so I had linebacker as my weakest. I had tight end as the second weakest. I had running back as the third weakest, and then safety as the strongest of this group.
Mm-hmm.
Which if you look at like how you sort like starter versus depth piece, you could probably make an argument that the depth pieces of the safety room are weaker than the other groups, right? Because of JT Woods and Raheem Lane.
Mm-hmm.
But this group has the best player in Derwin James. And I would say Alohi Gilman is at worst on this list, the fifth best player, but it kind of
Mm-hmm.
depends how you feel about, Eric Kendricks and Kenneth Murray, I guess. But
Mm-hmm.
this is a group where I think you feel comfortable about the starters. It's just the depth at these positions are really interesting. So then you kind of have to weigh like, young player versus player we just haven't seen a ton of. Like, how do you weigh Isaiah Spiller versus JT Woods kind of thing,
Right.
But I think you have to inflate the safety position because of Derwin, because he carries so much weight on this roster, because he's arguably the second best player on the team overall, maybe
Yeah.
third. So I think he carries that much weight.
Yep. We have the exact same. I don't know. I have 11 positions ranked. So we have the same 11 through 8.
Yeah, I also have 11. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay. After safety, what did you have next?
Right after safety was actually, this was a tough one too. Offensive tackle. And that could be higher because Rashawn Slater, you and I feel could be the best player on the entire team. Not obviously not the most valuable, but I mean, geez, that could be second most valuable. And then Trey Pipkins, I think, has done enough to be like, in my mind, he's top 15 right tackle or maybe even tackle in the league. Top 20 seems fair. Nothing too crazy. I don't think he's a top 5 or top 10 guy, but certainly not a what is he off the list for PFF of like 32 or whatever.
Yeah.
Not like that at all. So the issue with tackle is we're talking about the position group. And after that, it's Foster Sarell, who had a horrendous year, unfortunately. There's no other way to put it. If I call Storm Norton's 2021 horrendous, Foster Sarell's didn't play as much, obviously, but it was worse. So unfortunately,
he got significantly more help.
Yeah. And then it's, I mean, the other tackle is Nick Millsap. And I think it's tough because for like this list, Jamari Sawyer, Jordan McFadden, those guys are guards in this simulation, this scenario.
Yeah.
Technically, you could consider them tackles, but we can't really do that for this. So without being able to really add McFadden or Jamari Sawyer to that, love the top part of this tackle group. We've been talking about it all offseason. This is a great 1-2. The depth is atrocious. And so that's why they're 7th, despite the fact that Pipkins is a really good tackle and Slater's an elite tackle.
Yeah, I think, the tackle depth is definitely a concern for both of us. We've talked about it. If the Chargers had signed maybe kind of like a starting caliber guard and said Jamari's just going to be kind of our swing everything, then you feel very different about this tackle room, right? Because if you knew you had Slater, Pipkins, Sawyer as your 3 tackles, that's a great tackle trio, man. That's like one of the best tackle trios in the league. But the drop off to Sarell, like I'm rooting for him. People keep sending me stuff that I'm too harsh on him, and I get it. But like, I think it's kind of ridiculous that this team is banking on an undrafted free agent making a very sizable leap to just like not a train wreck as their 3rd tackle. Like, I don't know, man. It's just sketchy to me. He's done the work. He deserves credit for that, working with Duke Manyweather and everything. Absolutely. I don't like banking on that kind of development as my swing tackle. Like, it's just like, I understand that you could maybe bump Sawyer out there, but I would like to have like a bona fide, legitimate swing tackle behind these guys. So
yeah,
that does weigh that much. So for me, I actually had the interior defensive line next after safety.
Okay.
Just because there's a real possibility that who I think is the 2nd best defensive tackle in the group, Austin Johnson, and the 4th best defensive tackle in the room, Otito Ogbonia, are not even playing in week 1. There's a real chance that they're on the PUP list starting in training camp. We don't see them until after the bye week. So if you take those 2 out, you're talking about Morgan Fox, Sebastian Joseph Day, Nick Williams, Scott Matlock, and Chris Hinton as your 5. Like that's a concern for me. I think you could maybe make an argument that group is down more, but there is the chance, obviously, that Austin Johnson and Otito Ogbonia do return at some point on the year. So like I said earlier in the show, like I feel great about this room if everybody's healthy, but if you take out Austin Johnson and Otito Ogbonia, then you can make an argument that this is the worst position group on the team. Like that's the difference here of how much those two mean.
Yeah, you and I are about on the same page. I don't know where you have offensive tackle, but defensive tackle was my next one. And I think I had them. I wouldn't have put them first. I'll say that, but I think I had them 2nd or 3rd, and now they're 6th on my list after offensive tackle because of the reasons you just talked about.
Yeah, so we have flipped. So I have interior defensive line and then offensive tackle. I do think like the weight of Rashawn Slater, same kind of thing, matters a lot here, but just the lack of depth after that. So now we are into our top 5 here. So again, very curious how quarterback ends up. We'll see what happens there. So number 5 for me, Tyler, that's where I have the cornerbacks with Michael Davis, Asante Samuel Jr., J.C. Jackson, Josh Taylor, Dean Leonard. I guess you could throw Keemon Hall in here as well. If the ceiling hits of this group, I think you could be talking about the best position group on the team. Obviously, if J.C. Jackson comes back to form of who we saw from New England, that, again, we talked about this changing the ceiling of the defense as a whole. I think it definitely changes the ceiling of this position group. But until we see him, like, I think there is some uncertainty with what kind of player the Chargers are getting back. And then again, like I like Jasir Taylor more than most, but he is like overall not as quality of a player as Bryce Callahan was last year. And again, there's a lot of projection there. So I have the cornerback room at number 5.
I have them at 4, so we're pretty close. I'm curious who your number 4 is. We might be on the same page in terms of like the flip flop there. yeah, if JC Jackson were healthy, and he might be, we just don't know. But even then, we haven't seen him, and when we saw him, it wasn't great. So it was so tough to project him. If we saw like 6 games and they were really solid to good, maybe even great games, and then he got hurt, I'd move this group up to maybe second, depending on the injury, of course. But because the play that we saw from him during that time wasn't so hot, they benched him, he got hurt, and it wasn't so great again when he came back. Yeah, I just have this. I have them at 4. It's still a really good group. I think Michael Davis and Asante Samuel Jr. carry that quite a bit by being just good players. Michael Davis even playing great football at times. It's just JC. If I just knew a bit more, it'd be really easy to group this group, but I don't. So they're at 4 for me.
Yeah, totally fair. So who's 5?
Interior offensive line.
Wow. Okay.
So, well, one, I don't love Corey Linsley as much as you. To me, that was just. I think that, and I listen. I think Linsley, Zion, Jamari is fantastic, and the Chargers have done a really good job, I think, addressing depth. I think Jordan McFadden will be an excellent piece. I know Will Clapp isn't outstanding, but he is a backup for a reason, and I think he's a fine backup. Although some people don't love him because he got Justin Herbert hurt a couple of times. Which I get, like the optics aren't great, but like down to down to down, and overall, I think he's fine. He just was, I think he got hurt once or twice as well. So I have them at 5. I would love to. Like, I feel great about this group, but I just don't. I got to see it from Zion, and I got to see it from Jamari, who are flip flopping sides and playing some different roles. So if Zion was left guard last year and Jamari was right guard last year, and they played about as they did. Granted, Jamari was a tackle, and they played half decent. Then I'd feel better about this group. Linsley definitely carries this group. He's a top 5 Charger on the team. I gotta know a little bit more. Like this one was like a lot of projection for me, and I feel just better about the after corner, the 3 groups ahead of interior offensive line. Zion and Jamari, love them. I think this trio in the interior is going to be awesome. I just got to see it. I got to see a little bit more before I move them any higher.
That's fair. That's fair. I think this is like, we're kind of roundabout talking about this, but like the Chargers offensive line still feels like one piece away from like really being an elite group. Like I think if you look at those teams who have like elite offensive lines, like they have 6 guys like who you feel like great about. Like, you know, I think the Cowboys are still a very much elite offensive line. You know, Terrence Steele is probably a better right tackle than Trey Pipkins, and he's kind of like their 6th guy. He might be an odd man out this year. You know, I think that's really kind of the difference between the Chargers being one of those teams, you know, and one of those who are not. You know, I think you look at the Browns, they go like a legit 1 through 6. You know, you look at the Eagles, they go legit 1 through 6. So, you know, it's going to be interesting if the Chargers do get to training camp and use some of that last bit of change on maybe fortifying the depth up front. You know, there was a PFF thing about them potentially signing Dalton Risner, not like a rumor or anything, like it was a suggestion from a PFF writer. I can't see that happening because Risner, I think, is a starting caliber player, but I would still love like maybe one more depth piece here, whether it's a guard or a tackle, frankly, to come in and make this a stronger group overall.
Yeah, if you consider, I know he was I think a right tackle in college, played guard for the Broncos. If you consider him your guard backup and then Jamari's your swing, and that's how you rationalize it, then I mean, yeah, I'd love that. I don't know even why he isn't.
I don't get it either, man. I think he's one of the better guards in the league. I can't believe he's still a free agent.
I even think the numbers back that up. So that's a bit of a surprise, but hey, you know, stay available, I guess.
Yeah,
could use you.
There's definitely more free agent guards available than tackles for what it's worth. So, you know, I think Jamari is a good enough player where you can hand him that right guard spot. But like, if you're like, hey, like let's just maybe get a little bit more competition in here, and maybe Jamari's your swing tackle instead, I wouldn't be opposed to that.
Yeah, because they don't even have to. If Dalton hasn't signed at this point, I guess we'll see what his cost ends up being. I think like Lyle Collins signed pretty late last year, and he ended up being kind of expensive. But if he's not that expensive, you don't have to force Jamari Sawyer in a way. Like Zion has to play. No matter what, they have to play him. Granted, I
Yeah.
think he's really good, but they do have to play him. Jamari, listen, you have years to go, and he costs you nothing. So if you want to bring in some competition like Reisner, great, that'd be fine with me. But I don't know. I just think history is going to repeat itself for the Chargers. We pray for health, but we've seen this so many times, man. Like it's really disappointing. And this could be it's a whole other video. It's just disappointing to watch them repeat the mistakes from last year and the year before.
Yeah, I think they learned their lesson at receiver. I think you're
They
seeing
did.
that on the depth chart. But it's like, you're still banking on some kind of development at swing tackle to sort itself out. And you're like, okay, like, you can just go sign a cheap veteran for like 2.5 million and you don't have to deal with that kind of question mark. So we'll see what happens there. So I have the edge rush room at 4. I think for Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, I think that's probably the best 1-2 on the team. But I just think there's a pretty steep drop off, even though I like Thule a lot, from 2 to 3. And obviously, we're not the biggest Chris Rump stands on this show. I think he's a great dude, but one of the worst missed tackle rates in the league last year. So I think the drop off from starter to depth piece at edge is significant enough for me to put them at 4. Again, like I think best 1-2 on the team at any position, in my opinion. But that drop off from 3 to 4 is significant for me. So I have them at 4.
Yeah, I feel good about Thule. I think Chris Rump takes a step forward, but yeah, I have them at 3. I think that 1-2 really does carry. Outside of, I guess, wide receiver, I don't know that there's a better 1-2, but and arguably they are the better 1-2. But yeah, that drop off is pretty significant. So I'm curious, is interior offensive line second for you?
No, so I have interior offensive line 3rd.
Okay. Yeah, I have edge at 3rd.
So it's funny because like edge for me is like the best 1-2. The interior offensive line for me is the best 1 through 3. Because I think you have an elite center. I think you have Zion, who's going to take a sizable step forward, becoming a borderline Pro Bowl kind of guard, and then Jamari, who I think is an above average guard. So I think 1 through 3 feel great about that group. Again, like we were just kind of talking about, depth is still kind of a concern. I like Will Clapp more than most, but I don't think he's like an elite backup center by any means. So that does matter here, especially when weighing things in terms of comparing them versus the wide receivers, comparing them to the edge rushers. But I just think like Jamari as your 3rd is better than what you have at the edge rusher as your 3rd edge rusher. Yeah. And then the uncertainty at corner too. So Jamari was really kind of the differentiating factor for interior line, edge rushers, and corners for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. So sorry. So 5 through 3 is what again?
5 through 3 for me is corner, edge, and interior offensive line.
Okay, so I'm interior offensive line, corner, edge. So just different orders. Interesting. Okay. I was curious. I wasn't sure because you kept talking about quarterback. I was curious if there was going to be some sort of like sneaky, like their 5th or something. But
I mean, I thought about like, okay, like he's just the one guy. Like, I think you have to take into consideration Easton Stick a little bit, but it's like, ideally, Easton Stick just does not see the field. So I put quarterback at 2nd. I just like that's for me like as low as you can go because Justin Herbert is, an elite starting caliber quarterback. But I think like the depth at receiver for me. So receiver's number 1 for me. I don't know where that for you, but like the depth at receiver is kind of crazy this year. Like just Joshua Palmer as your wide receiver 4. Like how many teams can really say that they have a guy like Joshua Palmer as wide receiver 4? We'll see about Jalen Guyon's health. I think that is a concern. Darius Davis, I think you can do some fun things with on jet sweeps and things like that. Speed is certainly there. So receiver for me is number 1 just because I think the depth there is the best in the group. And like I mentioned, I think edge has the best 1-2. I think interior offensive line has the best 1 through 3, and then receiver is the best 1 through 4.
Yeah, I wrote excellent 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wide receiver, but not that all those guys are excellent, but just going through the list, that was the only one I knew for sure where I was going to put them. Wide receiver was first, and then everything else just kind of sorted itself after that. They just, and it is, I guess, depends on how you have them ranked. It is nice to look at this grouping that I have, and it's wide receiver, quarterback, edge, and corner are my 1, 2, 3, 4. Offensive tackle is more of a depth issue than a starter thing. But it's good to see that the Chargers, under Tom Telesco this season, for me, have wide receiver, quarterback, edge, corner, as my 1, 2, 3, 4. It just shows a lot of confidence in the group and premium positions. I think drafting Thule, drafting Quentin Johnson really went a long way to helping out these groups, and it makes it a more dynamic group. Oh, and there's
hello, Galadriel. But yeah, to that point, I mean the three like least valuable positions in terms of like their respective markets are running back, tight end, and linebacker right now in the league, and those are the three weakest that we have on the Chargers roster. So an interesting roster building thing, perhaps, from Tom Telesco.
Yeah, I guess so.
Doesn't
Shut up, dog.
Okay, so I think we're on the same page. Maybe some potentially like missing links here that could really prop some position groups up. Again, if the Chargers had signed, like, let's say theoretically, like a Dennis Kelly type, how much higher does the offensive tackle room move up for you?
I would say, honestly, it could be third because, it would be Rashawn, Trey versus, like, for me, edge. So Joey, Khalil. Rashawn, I think, is ahead of both those guys. Trey being the fourth of that group. But then if you go get a veteran tackle, it's sort of like veteran tackle versus Thule, who's a rookie who I really like. So I think they could have flirted. They definitely would have been in the top 5. I think they would have been fourth. I'll say fourth. And for me right now, I have them at 7th.
Yeah, I would have them, I would say 3rd or 4th as well. Yeah. And conversely too, like edge rushers, if they go out and if they had signed like Calvin Oy back, where's edge at for you?
Ooh, okay. So they're currently 3rd. I don't know. It's like, it's so hard to figure out how much do you need to pass Justin Herbert? Basically at 2. So wide receiver has 4 deep at that spot. Edge rusher with Calvin Noyd, I'd feel pretty good. I think they would stay at 3. Well, no, if they have Chris Rumph and Thule. I'll say this still be a 3rd. I'd still keep Herbert ahead. But Herbert wouldn't move past. I think quarterback could be first if they signed a Cooper Rush, to be completely honest, or some sort of group like that. Not that that's it's only like 2 guys for your depth.
Yeah.
But like Herbert,
they had a more established backup. Yeah. No, I'd tell you it. Just for what it's worth, some free agent offensive tackles out there. You got George Fant, who played for the Jets recently. Ty Nsekhe, who played for the Rams and the Cowboys previously. Jason Peters is still out there if you want, a 41-year-old backup tackle. Mike Remmers, Chris Hubbard, who's played some good ball for the Browns. So there's some options out there. Dennis Kelly, who I mentioned earlier. Let's look at edge, who's still out there.
Clowney,
Yannick Ngakoue, Jason Pierre-Paul. Shelby Harris is still a free agent. Interesting. He's more of a defensive lineman, though, not an edge.
Yeah, I'm surprised he was listed as such.
Robert Quinn, who played for Brandon Staley in Chicago. Derek Tuska, should we bring him back?
What 2015 edge rusher are we bringing back this year? I made a joke like Cordero Law or like, we'll see who's still available, who's still young.
Trey Flowers is a free agent.
Yeah. It is actually a bit encouraging that the Chargers have some, I would assume, hopefully, options. So some couple of guys go down. Not that this team went out of their way to sign a bunch of prize guys last year, but, guys that they're familiar with. So, like, worst case scenario, Bryce Callahan is still out there. Worst case scenario, Kyle Van Noy is still out there.
Yeah.
So, although I think Kyle's gone. I mean, he is gone.
Yeah, I think Kyle's done.
Yeah,
but we'll see. I mean, maybe he doesn't find a job. We'll see what happens. I guess kind of the big one. I've had so many John Johnson takes. I don't want to revisit that. In this sense, though, if they had signed John Johnson, how much do they move up for you?
So they're currently 8th. Jeez.
I would have moved them up at least one spot.
Yeah, probably. They might stay, honestly, for me, because I don't know. I would have to really look into John Johnson a lot more to officially say, like, okay, I like him better than Trey Pipkins. Yeah, maybe I'd flip-flop them with offensive tackle. So if they didn't sign a tackle, they signed John Johnson, then and you're keeping all, let's say, 5 safeties with Raheem Lane, maybe. Maybe not. But then I think I'd move him to like 7th, but it wouldn't be a big mover for me. Too much uncertainty still.
Yeah, I agree. I would move them up ahead of the defensive line, but I wouldn't move them up that much. And I like John Johnson. I do, but yeah. All right, Tyler, any final thoughts before we
Gonna go to do trivia again, defend my title. We've racked up so many gift cards now that we could practically eat for free. I don't know why we keep winning. It's certainly not because of me, but you know, we're gonna go defend our title.
What kind of trivia do you guys do?
It's just whatever. Like it's such a laid back thing. Like 20 teams show up of any size. We sit on the lawn. Well, I don't drink, but there's drinks. I drink a Sprite. There's pizzas and stuff like that. It's fun. It's just kind of whatever. But I got a big point last week because I knew who Joey Chestnut was, which is very timely. So I knew Joey Chestnut. Yeah. So I pulled that very late, and that was a big one.
Have you ever watched the hot dog eating contest, by the way?
I'll watch the clips of it on Twitter, maybe, and then I'm morbidly like curious and offended, but like inspired all at the same time.
I think I understand the way that they do it, but it's not even a contest anymore. They don't even eat anything. It's just they dip it and then they just consume it. It's disgusting. Yeah, I also hate hot dogs. I hate hot dogs.
Yeah, we had plenty of hot dogs available during 4th of July, and I ate all of 0.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know how someone could do that, and I don't know how someone could do it for 14 years or whatever it is.
Yeah.
At his age, at some point he's just gonna die up there, isn't he? Is that how he goes out?
He's just gonna have a heart attack on stage.
I would.
He's like an 80-year-old man still doing the hot dog eating contest.
But that's what I'm wondering. When do you retire? Is this like a Tom Brady? You just go for forever and then wait till you get beaten? Yeah. I guess no one's close. It's not even close.
Yeah. Funny. All right. Well, there you
That's
go.
How we're ending it. Cool.
We always get our way back to some food conversation at some point during the show.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so appreciate you guys for tuning in. Again, we are inching closer and closer towards training camp. So hopefully you guys are enjoying the off-season content. We're trying to mix it up and be different than recycling the same kind of off-season storylines and things like that. So we're going to get to some great interviews in the next couple of weeks, both on our channel and on the Chargers channel, getting to a bit more specific training camp content in the next couple of weeks as well. So fun stuff down the road. All right, that's going to do it for us. As always, make sure and leave us a rating or review on the audio platforms. If you could, take a second on the Chargers feeds as well. Leave us a rating over there. Really appreciate that as well. So that's going to do it for us. We'll see you guys next time. As always, bolt up.